And I'm very, very excited to be introducing our keynote speaker, Bob Johnson. Let me tell you just a little bit about Bob in case you don't know. I'm sure most of you know Bob. Bob is founder and chairman of RLJ Companies, an innovative business network that provides strategic investments in a diverse portfolio of companies. Bob was named by USA Today as one of the 25 most influential business leaders of the past 25 years. Sorry, Jim, I think that trumps you. Founder and former chairman of Black Entertainment Television, the nation's first Black-owned cable TV network. Number 2 on Black Enterprise's list of Titans, the 40 most powerful African Americans in business 40th anniversary issue. A frequent CNBC contributor, and very close to home and important to both EBRI and ABC, Bob is the chair of the Retirement Clearinghouse. So with that, I'd like to have Bob come up and he'll share some remarks, and then we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So thank you all for being here. It's going to be a great day.
Barbara, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And as my good friend Bill Clinton was reportedly to have said, flattery won't hurt you as long as you don't inhale it. So some of you remember that. But I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about my journey into Retirement Clearinghouse and auto portability and the Portability Services Network. But I'm not going to talk about the process of the technology or the innovation. I'll let Spencer do that. I'm going to try to share with you my journey into this retirement space and why I believe so strongly in the importance of this to low-wage workers, with particular emphasis on African Americans and women. The way I look at what we do is fairly simple, and so you guys understand it, is the key to auto portability, the key to long-term retirement health for 401k account holders and the companies that provide it, and the fund managers who manage it, is it's fairly simple. You keep it in the system and you let the magical elixir of compounding do its job. And if you do that, then retirement becomes a meaningful opportunity for millions of people who are underserved and in need of retirement security. So how I got into this, I've been in business, and one of the key ingredients that made me successful in business is that I have been fortunate to get to know people who believe in entrepreneurs and want to back them and give them support to achieve what they have as a vision and an opportunity. For me, the first person was a gentleman by the name of John Malone. John Malone is a multimedia billionaire who got his start in the cable industry, helped build the cable industry, and now is within every aspect of communications, telecommunications, and everything else. And he met me as I was serving as a lobbyist for the cable television industry when the industry was in its infancy and they were just beginning to deliver basic cable channels to add to the over-the-air television channels. And John met me, he was on the board, and said, Bob, if you ever have an idea, come talk to me. And I said, okay. And John lived in Denver, and I flew out to Denver with the idea of starting BET, Black Entertainment Television. Again, this is another example of what I call trying to reach out and do something innovative. And what I believe in is a business solution to a social problem. If you want to ask me what's your sort of moniker as to why you do things, I'm a firm believer that particularly if you're going to impact things like the huge wealth gap that exists between Black American families, households, and white American households, I'm not a big promoter of social handouts. I'm not a big promoter of transfer payments to solve the problem. I'm more of a believer in you give minority Americans and women the opportunity to achieve for themselves, for their family, for their community. 9 out of 10 times, they're going to take you up on that opportunity and put their best effort to make it work. So I found in John Malone a similar person who believed in entrepreneurs, he believed in merit. And if you had an idea that he thought was relevant and it related to something he believed in, he would back you. So I had the idea of starting Black entertainment television. It wasn't that I sort of invented the idea that Black programming needed to be on television, that Blacks needed more information that focused on their issues, more content, so on. There were others who did it. The famous John Johnson, who created Ebony Magazine, Jet Magazine, basically created a magazine empire chronicling the rise of the Black middle class and convinced advertisers that these consumers and readers, given an opportunity, would buy their products and so on. And the same can be said of Black radio, music that was targeted to Black listeners, found its way on Black radio. Essence magazine, was an example for Black women. So it was not so much my idea that I said Blacks need content or Black needs information. It was just, how do you do it with a technological innovation? Well, cable spread throughout the country with the launch of a geostationary satellite that allows you to beam a signal up to a satellite and beam it back down to cable disc and head in, dishes and head in all across the country, creating the ability to provide a huge amount of diversity of content. And of course, BET was part of that, MTV, ESPN, CNN, and all the cable channels today. So I go out to John Malone and I told him about the idea. He had cable systems. I had an idea of cable programming. So John asked me, he said, Bob, how much is it going to take you to start this thing called BET? I said, John, it's going to take me $500,000. Now, keep in mind, this is 1980, sometime around that time. $500,000 to start BET, a lot less than it take me to start Retirement Clearinghouse, Spencer. So he said, okay, and this took 30 minutes. It shows you what kind of entrepreneurial guy John is. He said, how much you need? I said, $500,000. He said, Bob, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy 20% of your company for $180,000. And I'm going to loan you $320,000. That's your $500,000. I said, yeah. And he said, Bob, under that plan, here's what you will be 80% owner and I will be 20. Is that a deal? I said, John, that's a deal. What John Malone didn't know at that time, if he'd reversed the numbers and said, I'll be 80 and you'll be 20, I would say, John, that's a deal. So I walk out of there with $500,000. Now, keep in mind a little bit about what Barbara didn't say about my background. I grew up in a small town. Well, I was born in Mississippi, moved with my folks with the migration of Black folks during World War II. Moved to a small town in Illinois, northern Illinois, called Freeport, Illinois. And that's where I sort of got my start. Freeport's a town about 30,000 people, 10% Black. The famous part about Freeport, for those of you who are history students, Freeport was one of the famous sites of the Lincoln-Douglas debate. It also was the boyhood home of Spencer Tracy. And also Hedda Hopper hung out in Freeport when she was up. And then you got me. So you got a pretty good group of people in Freeport. So, but to me, when I got, keep in mind, I was 9 of 10. And John Malone, after we closed the deal, 80-20, I got 80, he got 20. He gives me a check for $500,000. Now, to me, $500,000 is equal to the entire GDP of every Black person in Freeport. And you talk about somebody terrified that something's going to happen to me when I got that $500,000 check. I'm saying I got to fly back. Oh, I know the plane's going to crash. Something's going to happen to me. This is not going to work. So I get the money, and I'm getting ready to leave. We're going to ask John a question. I was afraid to, so I made sure he wrote me a little contract. Took all of 30 minutes. Give me a contract, giving me a check for $500,000. So now I was smart enough to get the check first before asking this question. I said, John, I've never run a business, but by that time I had the check. So I got the check now. I said, John, what advice can you give me? He said, Bob, this is really simple. Get your revenues up, keep your costs down. Same thing I tell Spencer too. Get your revenues up, keep your costs down. But that to me was someone saying to me, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to put confidence in you. Here's a white cable operator living in Colorado who see me, small town kid from Freeport, born in Mississippi, say, I'm going to believe in you. I'm going to believe in your idea of innovation of this channel. I'm going to believe in your idea that you're going to put as much work in this as I would expect you to do. And so it was that, I tell you that story because that's where I found myself in a position to look at another innovation idea that went directly to what I thought was a definite need of how you address the huge wealth gap between Black and white Americans. And so to me, it was that deal with John Malone, which led me to create Black Entertainment Television, sell it and make a significant amount of money, and have the capital to invest in the idea of how can we save wealth for Black Americans in retirement without going to the government to say, government, you do it, without any kind of obligation on the part of African Americans to do their part, which is work and save money in a 401k account, which I didn't know much about. I later found out about it through Spencer. So to me, the idea was, is there what I said earlier, a business solution to a social problem? Social problem, the way I looked at it, like this. The average white American household has a 10 to 12 times gap in the wealth differential between that of an average Black household. So let's assume that the average Black household has a net worth of $25,000, $30,000. That means the average white household has a net worth of $250,000 or $300,000. Now, you want to know what causes a crisis of fear about your future, a crisis of concern about your present? It's not knowing how you can survive when you face an economic crisis, an economic risk. And what that does is it causes Black Americans to do certain things economically that they probably shouldn't do because they don't have security in the form of wealth, which translates into investments and savings. And of course, obviously, an economic opportunity for a job. So I looked at that and I said, how can I solve this without going to government programs and subsidies and transfers and and so on? Because I didn't believe that. And for that same reason, although I understand why Black Americans talk, and some white Americans and some governments talk about reparations. Reparations is really not designed to put wealth in your hands for generations to come. Wealth reparations really is, you want to call it a payment for a, I guess you would best describe it as a treatment that deprive you of certain rights. And that's the right to accumulate wealth, the right to accumulate savings, the right to have a job, the right. But it's not going to, in my opinion, solve the problem, because just really simple in my mind, and you can quote me on this, it will never happen. There will be no universal reparations program for Black Americans. There won't be one statewide, citywide, because mostly white Americans don't buy into the notion that they owe a debt to people who hundreds, 300 plus years ago were slaves, and following slavery discriminated against, and following discrimination, lack of economic opportunity, whether it's education, whether it's jobs, whether it's ownership of certain government assets, and so on. So it's not going to happen. So my thing was, how do I address the huge wealth gap? How do I address the need to have Black Americans accumulate wealth? And how do I address the need for white Americans to say, we can support a program that provides a business solution to a social problem? So just as I met John Malone, I meet Spencer. Spencer has an innovative idea, except Spencer didn't have any money like John did. I had the money. So Spencer told me, Bob, there's a way to help improve wealth and savings of Black American families. I said, how do you do that? He said, there's this problem that happens when people change jobs. And I said, well, what's that? Black Americans cash out, and they lose what I call the magic elixir of compounding, and they don't have the savings when they retire. Now, I understood a little bit about that once he explained it to me. I said, aha, I get this, because remember now, I was running BET, and BET had a lot of Black people working for it, as you can imagine. And so what happened is I said, gee, I got to do something to help my workers. So what I would do, it was my own version of my own 401k account. It wasn't a 401k account. It was sort of like a, I'll help you fund. Here's what we would do. We said, look, I know all of you guys are good workers. I know I want you to be around here a long time. But if you have a need for something, and I sort of tailored it as an emergency need or an important need at least, I say, you come to me and say, you need $1. I'll give you 50 cents on that dollar to help you do something that's a need. But it has to be, keep in mind, I wasn't doing this with a legal term. We weren't at an HR program. It was me and them. And I said, here's what you should do. Just come to me. Tell me you got a family crisis. Tell me you got your roof leaks. Tell me you need money for your mother. She said, and we'll do it because I know you're going to be it. And you'll pay us back over time. And we started doing that. And some of the people would say, come to me, Mr. Johnson, my mother is sick. She's got to get some medical help, and I need, $200. Can you give me another $100? It's 50% ratio. I said, yeah, Joe, Mary, you worked here a long time, expect you to be along. Sure, we do it. it was going along pretty good as a program until all of a sudden I start hearing from the senior executives who work for me. People are coming and asking me, can you help them go to the Howard University homecoming? I said, they want $200 to go to homecoming. They need another $100 to stay at a hotel. I said, I'm not sure that's what the program was intended for. And they would say, well, I'm going to pay you back. I got a great job. And, this is my first year. I just graduated from Howard. I want to go back to homecoming. And when I started to realize that's not the program I had in mind, but I understood the need and desire for people to have things that they wanted and that they couldn't afford, ergo cash outs. And then I sort of challenged Spencer. Spencer, find out what we can do to eliminate the cash outs. And Spencer worked at Mass Mutual. And so he knew something about the retirement service. And he told me two things. That's the only thing you can go to that can solve this. You've got to get the retirement industry to embrace this notion. I said, okay. And then I said, well, what's the problem? He said, they move as slow as ever. And I said, it can't be that slow. He said, slow as ever. So this is, I'm doing this, going on this ride with Spencer. Little did I know, 10 years later, he was absolutely telling the truth. So the first thing I said, Spencer, what does the government have to do with this? He said, government's got to give us approve certain regulations, certain exemptions on our ability to do this, authorize us to do it, authorize to have certain sort of ways to enforce the idea of ending cash outs. And I said, well, how do you get that done? He said, Bob, simple. All you got to do is get somebody in the government to write you a letter. I said, you mean there's just a letter that somebody can sign and I can keep black folks from cashing out? He said, yep. 10 years ago, I went to 3 administrations, Obama, Trump, Biden, to get the government to see this, now when I think of it, simple solution to solve a social problem. That is the lack of retirement savings for Black Americans. And as I got into this and started thinking about it, how do you shrink the wealth gap? How do you eliminate I'll call it the myth, maybe it's a myth for a good cause or a good belief, that one day there's going to be reparations and close the wealth gap for Black Americans. And something that did not require transfer payments from taxpayers who didn't want to pay in the first place. It is to change the mindset, come up with an innovative solution that simply said, we're going to make things that you think are hard, things that you think are complex, you being the employee, you being the employer, you being the government, and just make this work by giving people an option to save for their own financial security and their own financial future. And we would begin to close the savings gap. And if you can close the savings gap, you're on the road to closing the wealth gap. Because with savings, the magical thing about savings, I said, if you put it someplace that's managed, and it's managed in a way that compounds the wealth, the odds are not only will you save what you get in your work life, you will have a saving mentality in your existing life and start looking at how you consume. When I happened to go to graduate school at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton, and I'll never forget this term. I was in this class, and this professor of economics, it was a macroeconomics class. And we got to talking about consumption. And somehow he said the problem of debt accumulation. And he said that Black Americans as a whole have the highest marginal propensity to consume. And I said, what does that mean? He said, they have a lot of debt. And they have a lot of debt because they can't afford to save or have not been introduced to the benefits of saving and haven't focused on how savings can change their economic condition. And so when I think of 401k Audibility and the Portability Service Network and the companies that have come to this to be a part of this, is they're basically saying we can find a business solution to a social problem. And we've done it in a way that has almost, and I applaud this to the Portability Services Network partners, the 6 partners in this. We decided from day one that it would be run like a utility. Try to find the lowest cost methodology of providing the maximum benefit to low wage workers. So when you think of what we can do as we grow Portability Services Network, $200+ billion begin to stay in the system and therefore in the hands of minority and low wage workers. And the same thing can be said if later on we're able to get the savers match to follow that methodology. And so when I look at it and I look at something I've done, and now believe me, I understand reparations. In fact, if you, some of you go online, you can say Bob Johnson did a study on reparations. I did. It was a simple process. I said, I came up with a model that I did with some help. It was not totally scientific, but it, it made sense, sort of, but sort of the old saying, clear as mud, but it covered the ground. And, so I came up with a number, and I'll give you that number, $14 trillion. And the idea was how I reset that number. I said, what I want to do is I want to make every Black person in America as rich and wealth as the average white American. So that meant I had to take Black household spread, make it equal. Household, white household, 60%, Black household, 37%. I got to now bring that up. And how much does that cost? I got to do it in employment job payment. I got to bring that up. How much does that cost? And all of these factors that make the spread, I had to figure out a way to bring it up. And I realized that the only way that would work is you'd go to everybody who had 14 trillion and ask them to give it to the people who did have it. Not going to happen. Particularly when you say all Blacks, whose parents and generations ago were slaves. So one day, the poorest Black guy in America walks up and he says, here's your $100,000. You say, oh, that's fair. Then the next person to walk up is Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, here's your $100,000. You're Black. And then Bob Johnson, here's yours is Black. And Magic Johnson, yours is Black. All of a sudden, people say, I'm not giving Michael Jordan $100,000. I'm not giving Bob Johnson $100,000. Ergo, not going to happen. So what my appeal here is, let's think of this. Our goal is to close a wealth gap that gives confidence and security to people who wake up every day feeling insecure. Because any day, I'm a single mom, 3 kids, and the refrigerator goes out. That's fear. That's insecurity. What do they have to do when they're living paycheck to paycheck? And don't even mention what happens when you're retirement, when you're the son and a daughter of a mother or a father who gets Alzheimer's disease and needs in-home nursing care. No way in the world can you pay that if you have no savings and you are totally facing a problem. You know what you do? Unfortunately, sometimes you run down to a payday lender. And you know what a payday lender does? Charges you 60, 70% for your own money. That to me is why retirement is such an important, I guess I would call it an important device, system, plan with a touch of morality in it, and a touch of morality in it, a touch of a commitment to give people a chance to care for themselves. And that's what I want. That's why I put money behind Spencer and his innovation. That's why I went up and down Capitol Hill to members of the House and the Senate. That's why I end up talking to every White House administration that would listen. And that's why it took us 10 years from the moment we conceived of this to get it now where the largest managers of 401k accounts have sort of put aside a competitive set that normally exists with among these businesses and said, we're going to trade not only technology, we're going to trade data in a way that we are confident the end result will be for a common good. And that's why I'm so excited about retirement here, Klaus. That's why I'm excited about the opportunity to talk to you. And we will need your help when we get to, I don't know, the 25, 26, when they begin to try to implement the Sabres match. Because one of the things you got to do, again, you got to convince some naysayers, or my worst fear is when the government wants to do it all without having a public-private partnership. I would prefer to have business do it rather than the government. So thank you very much. And I will be glad to take any questions that you have.
Hi, thank you very much for, I'll stand up so you can see. Thank you very much for speaking with us today. It's really inspiring story. I'm curious about Secure 2.0 and the lost and found. That's one of the provisions in there, which hasn't been implemented yet, I don't think, but basically the idea is to have a lost and found for any accounts that disappear. And this happens. I mean, I teach financial literacy classes, and some of the folks are like, yeah, I had a retirement account 20 years ago. I have no idea where it went. Does that impact your business at all? Is that good news, bad news? Can you incorporate that into what you're doing?
I'm going to give you the answer to that question by telling you a quick story. One of the things that's made me successful, I have been very good at getting people like John Malone to help me get in business and be successful. I'm therefore was able to become the first African-American billionaire because I met John Malone. I'm also the largest owner of Black-owned dealership of car dealerships because I was fortunate enough to meet a guy named Matt McClarity, who was Bill Clinton's chief of staff. And now I'm the largest owner of the Portability Service Network thing because I met a guy named Spencer. Three things about these guys. They're all good white guys. Spencer, come up and tell them what the answer to that question is.
I was afraid of the technical questions. Bob, your story is amazing. And I've had the privilege of literally, 10 years daily contact with Bob. And I've seldom met people in my life that just stick to something. When I told him, he remembers this story. I said, this is going to take 5 to 10 years, Bob. He's like, are you serious? You know, type of thing. So the answer is the Portability Services Network has a role to play in the lost and found. I don't know what the full solution is, but I'm going to give you a picture. All right. At full throttle, okay, everybody's on board, for auto portability and accounts are moving around the system seamlessly. That's one function. The second function is you created a virtual database of all the 401k account holders in the country. And their address of record is with their current employer. So if you want to solve the missing participant problem, first, move old accounts so that they're always current. And second, take advantage of that 80+ million member database of the second best data on the planet. The best data on the planet is when a participant actually gives us their address. Nobody does that, right? So the answer is the Portability Services Network and its utility function has multiple purposes. So there's the technical.
Told you, Kelly. What it was. Yes.
Hi, great presentation. There was some reference to financial literacy in the prior question, and it always seemed to me that financial literacy is a major problem in this country. It's a major problem among whites. It's probably a greater problem among Blacks. Do you have any thoughts about how to address the financial literacy issue? Because that's part and parcel of trying to solve the retirement problem.
Yeah, my idea, again, I have these ideas that I throw up and sometimes I carry them out, sometimes I don't. I was at a conference where it was a presentation by the top guys who are involved in the creation of AI. And also on that panel, that group, were people involved in games, not football game, but games, the kind of games that people play. If I were in charge of making a decision like that, I would make every school require them to create the kind of compelling games that kids play, whether they war game, whatever they play. Teach them how that can be turned into a game. And if they are successful in winning points in those games, those points turn into dollars. It pays their way through college. And get people to invest in that pool of reward money. So every high school boy and girl, every kid would start playing those games like they play them now. I don't care whether they're NBA games or football games or warfare games or whatever you want to call them. Focus on things that they understand. Somebody says, I want to be a I want to be a record producer. All right, create a game about how you become a record producer. And that's something they like. So you meet them where they live, so to speak. And all of a sudden, they learn that being a record producer, you got to have people to, write music. You got to have audio studio to make the music. Money being spent. You understand how that works. The idea is it focuses on young people because as you get older, and you basically, if you don't have the retirement and you don't, it's kind of hard to get literacy going. You got to get it done at that young age. And it's got to be an in-game reward, not just bingo, you won. But your parents need to know that, okay, he's playing this game. But if he plays this game, he's guaranteed that if he scores high enough a win, there's money over here for him or her to go to college. It's basically, you're paying for something you believe in. You just don't have a way to transmit it to the recipients of what you believe in. That's the way I look at it.
Just a point of clarification. Lots of great points you brought up today. And cash outs are certainly a challenge. The clarification is, does the auto portability network solve cash outs? Is that the?
That's the fundamental objective of auto portability, is to have a system that follows your 401k wherever you go forever. And if assuming an average American changes jobs 10 times in their work life, you got your auto portability 401k just goes with you. The key is back to what the point you just raised. You got to add a level of savings to that outside of the 401k. Because that's not going to ever be, may not necessarily be enough for total retirement. But the simplicity was the primary goal. And out of simplicity will come an inducement to do what is in your best self-interest. So it has that component to it. It's got a little bit of I wouldn't call it an enforcement, but it does have a little bit of encouragement in the form of the right to move it if you don't move it yourself and you don't cash out. So, yeah, we believe in that kind of, and I wouldn't call it a negative option, but it's focused on that. Any other questions? Go ahead, question over here. Last one.
Just a comment more than a question, and thank you so much for your talk today. I think what we're talking about here is the need for behavior change. There's a lot of great work being done here. Automaticity has done wonders to help save people from themselves. But I think what's really, really important is infiltrating employees, American workers, through advisory services. So there's a lot of great work being done on this. I don't know if everyone's familiar with Yemi Rose and his organization Of Color, but they offer advisory services to employers to help solve this problem. It requires coaching. It requires outreach and education. Policy alone is not going to help. And I think there's just a lot more work that needs to be done. And I think everyone should check out Of Color. It's a really great organization. I don't work for them. I don't work with Yemi Rose, but I've had an opportunity to talk to them. And I think it's a really, really important additive in the meantime, while this policy work is continuing. So.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. We've thought, at least I thought about it. I haven't sort of pushed it on the idea to the PSN group that we could become a brand that says, this is what you can do to induce people, motivate people to go down to their HR office and say, hey, I heard about this thing that's being run by this guy named Bob Johnson that's supposed to save money for Black folks. How do I get in it? I mean, however you want to describe it. We've thought about that as just becoming a nationwide brand, like savings is sort of like a cool thing to do or the smart thing to do in your life. Eventually we could get there, but right now we got a lot of regulations that probably would frown on that or prohibit that, or we may be too early in the queue to do that. But I think you're absolutely right. You're not going to cause people to start saving to save for what they need as to buying what they want. That's where I think you got to get. And that's not just Black Americans, white Americans too. It's just, you got to put more, people got to start thinking is consumption, material consumption without a savings plan is a game that's going to end badly. So thank you.